Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about one of my very favorite bands of all time, and that's Procol Harum. And the reason that I want to talk about them today is because it was on this day that Whiter Shade of Pale hit #1 in the UK, while in the next few weeks it rose to the top of the charts in the US and many, many other countries. It was a seismic hit. It was a song that combined Bach-inspired organ lines, the wonderfully subtle but brilliant piano of Gary Brooker, and the great lyrics of Keith Reid. Now, speaking of that, I think we really ought to think of Procol Harum not only as a band, but also as one of the great songwriting duo partnerships of all time. And that was, of course, the partnership of Gary Brooker, who wrote the music, and Keith Reid, the poet who wrote the lyrics. And he was considered an official member of the band, even though he didn't touch an instrument. He was considered a vital part of the band and was listed as such on all of the albums. King Crimson did the same for a while with Pete Sinfield. But with Procol Harum, the writing partnership really created some of the very best songs ever. I would put these songs up there with the things that Jimmy Webb was doing at the time. When you talk about songwriting partnerships, people think of Lennon and McCartney, they think of Elton John and Bernie Taupin, and I would put the Gary Brooker Keith Reid partnership right up there. They were really that good. Now, obviously, the band had many albums and not a single song of filler on any of them. Each one was absolutely brilliant. Whiter Shade of Pale success led to the formation of a stable lineup, and they released their self-titled album. This was followed up by Shine On Brightly, and then A Salty Dog. And then we switched organ players. Matt Fisher left, Chris Copping came in, and you have an album called Home, followed by a great one called Broken Barricades that featured a great title track, Song for a Dreamer, written by Robin Trower, one of his compositions for the band, apart from the main songwriting partnership, and of course, the great Brooker and Fisher composition, Simple Sister. Trower left the band after that, but they went on to record Grand Hotel, a wonderful kind of concept album. And then after that, an album that I think is really overlooked a lot, Exotic Birds and Fruits. You have The Idol, great song. Strong as Samson, great song. New Lamps for Old, brilliant song. Then you had an album of covers called Procol's Ninth, which we'll skip. And then the final album of that golden period, Something Magic, and the great suite of music on side two, The Worm and the Tree, is such a tearjerker. Earlier in their career, Inheld Twas in I, say that 10 times fast, on the second side of Shine On Brightly. And then the final album of the classic period, of course, had The Worm and the Tree. Now, in addition to these two suites, I think that in many ways they should be remembered, for the classic 3-4 minute song, because even though they were very progressive and very adventurous, it was all rooted around classic song structure. Very interesting music, very interesting lyrics, and they were sort of genre defying. If you liked the quintessential prog rock bands, your Yeses, your ELPs, your Genesises, say that 3 times fast, your King Crimsons, you were going to like Procol Harum. But if you liked great songwriters, people like Jimmy Webb, people even like the Carpenters, you would like Procol Harum. If you liked the Beatles and the Stones, you'd like Procol Harum. If you liked heavy metal, you could probably appreciate a lot of the Baroque and Bach influenced harmonies, because that went on to influence early metal, things like Sabbath, Uriah Heep, Deep Purple. And so it was really hard to dislike them. I mean, even if you like jazz, you could probably enjoy the interplay between the piano and the organ, and of course, the great drumming, which was kind of Buddy Rich inspired of BJ Wilson. Very, very, very good drummer who sadly died in the early 90s, far too young. He He was really, really good. He was, in fact, Led Zeppelin, before they ran into John Bonham, they considered bringing BJ Wilson into the band to be the drummer of Led Zeppelin. How cool is that? But everyone won because John Bonham was great and BJ Wilson was great in the band he was already in. I really would encourage you to listen to all of the original Procol Harum albums. And Gary Brooker in the 80s did some great solo stuff too. A song that is really a tearjerker that Brooker wrote in the 80s is The Long Goodbye. And the album, I think that was called Take Me to the Water. I need to double check that. Well, you can. That's what the internet is for, I think. It's for other things too, I guess. But that is a beautiful song. The band actually did reunite, including with Trower briefly in the early 90s, but by that point, Wilson had gone. Still great stuff in the reunion period, and they came out with more albums in the late 90s and early 2000s, much more sporadically, all really good stuff. But of course, it was that classic period that from 1967 to 1977 that really defined the band. Even before Procol Harum, Gary Brooker was in a band called the Paramounts that were making waves in the sort of club and pub scene in England. And it was really only a matter of time before someone that talented was going to be a star. Now, while Procol Harum sold lots of records, they toured Europe, toured America. I think at one point they toured Japan. They should have been even bigger. And a lot of this can be put down to the fact that record labels like to label, meaning they like to label bands. Oh, okay, you're heavy metal because you sound like Black Sabbath or Led Zeppelin. Call it hard rock too if you want. Again, these labels are a bit more fluid than you think. Oh, you're a kind of singer-songwriter band because you sound like James Taylor or Elton John or the Carpenters. Oh, you're a sort of blues-based band because you're a bit like Free, a bit like Bad Company. But the point is, Procol Harum were all of these things. And because the songwriting was so damn good, they were really accessible, even when they went to the more experimental side or when they went to the more bluesy side, particularly when Robin Trower was in the band, but they had good guitarists after that as well. Michael Grabon was really good. Dave Ball, who was in there briefly, also very good. And so they retained their sound, even though some of the members changed. But that central core of Brooker, Fisher, and Wilson really, really held down the fort. And the lineups are actually much more stable than you'd imagine, particularly in that early to mid 70s period. Luckily, even for a band that wasn't as big as it should have been, there's a lot of footage of them on television in many countries. The Midnight Special did a show built around them as guests live from London. They normally filmed out of NBC in Burbank, but they did 3 weeks in London. One of them was hosted by Procol Harum. Beat Club, the great West German television show, did a whole sort of 45-minute Procol Harum in studio concert. That's been uploaded to the Beat Club YouTube. And there are many other both live and TV performances that were captured of them in the 70s and a few in the late 60s. So luckily, you'll get to see just how good they were live. The difference between the album and the live performances was virtually none. They really sounded great at all times. And that's a skill when you're playing music that involves both organ and piano simultaneously in this sort of rocky, prog rocky, folky rocky, call it what you will, genre. Again, they were kind of sort of their own genre. And I say that a lot about certain bands, but certain bands are. Frank Zappa was kind of his own genre. Well, I would say very much his own genre. Procol Harum certainly were. As a songwriter, Jimmy Webb sort of invented a new style of songwriting. We talked about him a few weeks ago. So the bands that I really like sort of both defy expectations and define future anticipations, if you will. And Procol Harum really did that. And the albums really, really stand up. They're not dated, they're just Procol Harum. They were a band that shaped their time, and those kinds of bands are by definition always timeless. So, A Whiter Shade of Pale has been voted in various polls around the world as the best or one of the best singles, songs of all time. All of their stuff was good. And because it's all on Spotify and Apple and Amazon and the rest of it, I am ordering you to take a deep dive into Procol Harum. All of their albums are great. They'll make your weekend happy. You will not regret it. And remember, Brooker Fisher, one of the greatest duo songwriting partnerships ever. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.